What if the only way to survive in the world was to stop living in it? In Japan, over 1 million people have done exactly that, vanishing into their rooms for decades to escape a society that won't let them fail. This isn't a story about shut-ins or an anime trope, it's a warning about a digital trap that's currently closing in on the rest of the world. This is the reality of the Hikikomori phenomenon. To understand why, we have to go back to when. In 1991, Japan went from being on top of the world economically to its darkest era yet, the lost decade. When that massive economic bubble burst, it sent a whole country into a tailspin. You had an entire generation of young people who were raised to expect stable, successful lives, and suddenly they were facing layoffs, no jobs, and zero chance of moving up. In Japan, there's a huge concept called the Seken. This is basically the weight of society's expectations. It's this invisible pressure to follow a perfect linear path. School, uni, salaryman job, and then retirement. If you trip up once, if you fail at an exam or lose a job, that Seken spotlight feels like it's burning you alive. For a lot of people, the only way to turn off that light was to hide where it couldn't reach, inside their own four walls. But there's another layer to this that most Westerners don't see. The concept of ame. It's a Japanese word for the desire to be loved and taken care of, to be able to depend on your parents indefinitely. In a healthy way, it's a bond. In the world of Hikikomori, it becomes a trap. Parents feel a deep sense of haji, or shame, if their child fails, so they often enable the isolation. They often provide food and shelter for decades, hiding their children away from neighbors to just save themselves. It becomes a cycle of silence where neither the parent or the child knows how to break it. I actually talked about how this era of despair shaped the artwork of that time. In my last video on Hideki Anno, the Lost Generation didn't just create shut-ins, it pushed Anno to create Neon Genesis Evangelion. That show is basically a masterpiece defined by the exact same isolation we're talking about today. It captured what psychologists called the Hedgehog's dilemma. Imagine two hedgehogs in the freezing cold. They want to get close to each other for warmth, but the closer they get, the more they prick each other. To stay warm, they have to endure the pain. But for many Hikikomori, the pain of being pricked by society, by judgment, and by failure is just far too much. So they choose to stay in the cold, alone where it's freezing, but at least it's safe. I know I use this metaphor for Shinji Ikari, but it's the literal reality for millions of people in Japan right now. If you're interested in that video, I'll have it in the description down below. Even though the behavior started in the early 90s, the term Hikikomori wasn't officially used until 1998. As the lost decade dragged into the 2000s, the reason for withdrawal started to change. It wasn't just about money anymore. Things like school bullying, debt, and severe depression became the main drivers. This is also when being a Hikikomori and being an otaku became linked in everyone's heads, since being labeled as an otaku was still a huge social taboo back then. A lot of shut-ins only felt safe leaving the house for anime-related stuff. It was the one thing that gave them a sense of belonging. That's exactly why it started showing up in anime so much. The biggest example is Welcome to the N.H.K. If you want to understand what it actually feels like to be stuck in a cage, this show is the blueprint. It follows Tasahiro Sato, a guy who's so desperate to explain away his failure that he invents a conspiracy theory. He claims that a secret organization, the N.H.K, is literally forcing him to stay isolated. It's raw, awkward, and honest, at the paranoia and crushing boredom of that life. It proves that being a Hikikomori isn't just chilling at home. It's a mental prison where the walls are built out of your own embarrassment. Recently, that desire to escape has turned into the isekai trend. Think about how many protagonists start off as Hikikomori who are bullied or broken in the real world. The reason that trope is everywhere is because it offers the ultimate second chance. It lets somebody who has given up on life to be reborn as someone powerful, social, and loved. For the viewer, these characters aren't just fantasy heroes. They're a mirror of a deep desire to hit the reset button on your entire existence. But the tragedy is that there's no reset button in the real world. While everyone is watching a fantasy escapism, the real crisis in Japan just aged and gotten harder to fix. For some, it feels like this trend is fading, but for others, the silence is getting deadlier. Japan still has really high suicide rates, and you have to wonder if some people are choosing a permanent exit instead of a life of isolation. For the people who stayed, we're now looking at the 80-50 problem. People who withdrew in the 90s never actually recovered. They're in their 50s now, still being supported by parents who are in their 80s, close to death. What happens when that support runs out? This is leading to something even darker, kudokashi, or the lonely death. This is where people die in their apartments and nobody notices for weeks or even months. Special cleaning crews in Japan literally exist to handle these cases. They go into apartments with over years of trash and otaku merchandise, cleaning up after people that the world forgot. If your only link to the world was a parent who just passed away, the risk of becoming a statistic is terrifyingly high. It's a silent tragedy that's forcing the government to finally step in. If you started using things like rental sisters, these are support workers, usually young women who are hired by parents to try break free to their children. They don't use force, they just stand outside the bedroom for weeks, talking to them from behind the door. They wait until the person inside feels enough human connection to finally turn the handle. It's an expensive service and it's controversial, but it shows you just how starved for a real connection these people actually are. And this is where the line between hobby and trap starts to really blur. In the 90s, you were alone with your thoughts. But in 2026, we have a digital cocoon between VTubers, AI companions, and infinite social media feeds. You can feel like you have a social life without even opening a window. It's simulated intimacy that makes the real world feel even colder by comparison. And look, I know exactly how seductive that cocoon is. From the age of 16 to 19, I was delving deeper into the world of Hikikomori myself. I've had the weeks where I didn't leave the house once, just bedrotting, doom scrolling, and losing myself in games. Putting myself in the shoes of video game protagonists was the only real escape I had. At the time I was broke, I had no job, and I wasn't in education. I was drawn in my own insecurities about my future, mixed with my own personal issues and mental health struggles. When you're in that state, games like Yakuza and Persona become literal life. You can sink hundreds of hours into those worlds. In Persona, the whole world is literally built on forming bonds called social links. You're a high schooler with a calendar full of friends, a girlfriend, and a mission to save the world. It's why I was and why many others are drawn to these characters. In reality, you feel invisible, broken, and imperfect. But in game, you can quite literally switch places with a fictional character. You can leave your boring, mundane life behind and live as someone who actually matters, someone people actually look for when they're in trouble. It's so easy to forget that the real world exists when you spend hundreds of hours as a JRPG protagonist saving the universe, or a legendary Yakuza with a weirdly intense obsession with late-night karaoke. In those worlds, you have purpose. When Kiryu walks around the streets of Kamurocho, he has power, he has friends, and he has a path. He can fix people's lives with a single side quest. But the second you turn up the monitor, the silence in the room feels 10 times heavier. You realize while you were busy in Kamurocho, the real world was just moving on without you. The game ends and the credits roll, and you're still sitting in the same dark room with the same problems you had 100 hours ago. Japan isn't the outliner anymore. It was just the first country to reach the finish line, of a race the rest of the world was currently running. In 2026, we're seeing the global rise of digital withdrawal, from NEETs in the UK to doomers in America. The story of Hikikomori is a warning about what happens when the pressure to succeed is far bigger than the support to live. We built a society where it's easier to fall into despair than it is to fail, where it's safer to live as a fictional hero than an imperfect human being. Maybe the first step to coming back is just admitting that we're stuck. But what do you think? Do you feel the pull just to stay inside and bedrock? Or do you think this is something society can eventually fix? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm curious to see how many of you felt the digital trap closing in. I'll be down there in the comment section responding to as many people as I can. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. It really helps the channel out. We're trying to hit 1,000 subscribers by June. And if you want to see how the same era created Evangelion, please check out my previous video, which will be linked right below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.